In a week of criticism against European leaders for failing to immediately respond to his call to send warships to secure the Hormuz Strait, Europe's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, earlier this week had pushed back, saying we don't know the objectives of this war. But several governments, including France and the UK, have since said they are ready to help, only on a mission separate to the current war. Let's go to Dave Keating, our man in Brussels. Good to talk to you, as always, Dave. Tell us two things. Are we seeing any reaction from NATO commanders, chiefs in Brussels? Are we seeing any diplomatic response from European allies? And remind us on the position of the EU on the Straits of Hormuz.
Yeah, we haven't seen any reaction yet. I think it will be the usual type of reaction when we get Donald Trump snubs to NATO, which is a kind of denial that we see in this town. I mean, the fact is that Donald Trump keeps talking about NATO as if it is a third party, as if the United States is not part of it. We've already seen now the Secretary of State no longer attends NATO summits. The Secretary of Defense no longer attends NATO summits. So long before the Iran war was launched and Trump made this request of NATO allies to send ships to the Strait of Hormuz, it was clear that Donald Trump does not consider himself or the United States to really be part of NATO. So what he's saying in that Truth Social post when he says NATO is a paper tiger without the United States, he's not really describing a future scenario there. He's describing the current scenario. And that's why I don't think we're going to get any big response from NATO leaders to this, because this is a reality that they don't really want to acknowledge. Now, on the question of the Strait of Hormuz, there was some confusion yesterday because we have the statement come out from G7 countries saying that they want to protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, and then we had the Council conclusions from the EU summit last night seeming to say the same thing. But then in the press conference afterwards, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and the French President Emmanuel Macron both made it clear that any mission in the Strait of Hormuz could only take place after the conflict has ended. So in other words, they are not saying yes to Donald Trump's request. They're saying that they would help keep the strait open after the conflict has ended, not before, and not engage with Iran in any way to forcibly open the strait. That has been the pretty consistent line coming out of European countries for the past week.
And it's worth bearing in mind, kind of amidst the breathless sequence of breaking news, you have a call for help from President Trump this week, a very clear dissatisfaction, perhaps capricious in its nature. We had this rebuke to some point, didn't we, with the Irish Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, the White House, defending some European leaders, including Keir Starmer, who we know Trump had said is no Winston Churchill. And then we have this extraordinary, in the midst of this, report from the Danish public broadcaster DR, reporting that Danish troops had been sent to Greenland in January. They claim, the government is not denying this, that they were there preparing to destroy the runways, taking blood with them as well in case troops were wounded. That gives you a sense of added context to this week, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was a very interesting development because at the time, the assumption was that these European troops were being sent to Greenland more as a symbolic gesture to show force, but of course that they would never actually try to resist a U.S. invasion. Now we're hearing that at least the Danish troops were under instructions to make it as difficult as possible for the Americans to invade. That's new. That wasn't our understanding before. Now, it's not clear that any of the other countries that sent troops there, small numbers of troops, including Germany, France, the UK, whether they were also operating under specific instructions. But it also begs the question, why is this coming out now? As you mentioned, the Danish government has not denied this. It seems likely that this story came from the Danish government itself. We're not exactly sure why this is coming out now and who it came from. But the timing, I think, is perhaps not accidental. Warning about the state of the transatlantic alliance and the fragility of NATO here. I'm not sure if maybe Donald Trump's comments came in reaction to this news, in addition to him being upset about the NATO allies not sending troops to the Strait of Hormuz. But it is really reflective of the dire state of transatlantic relations right now.
I'm also fascinated where you are I know well, and as you do over the years, a place of briefings where public talk is sometimes very different from the private briefing you get. I can even see what we're talking in my old office behind you in the distance. Now, are you hearing anything different privately than the public reactions you're getting, not just in the EU, but down the road at the NATO headquarters too? Because don't forget, we're hearing this constantly. Chipper, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, saying that there's no problem. Washington knows what it's doing. Privately, is that mirrored?
Privately, it's not mirrored, and I will say the distance between the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, and European leaders, national leaders, seems to be growing ever wider. I think if you went back 5 months ago, you would have seen that Mark Rutte's talk of always trying to appease Donald Trump, always trying to downplay the drift between the United States and Europe, that was also reflected, even, I will say, in what Commission officials would tell us privately. It seemed that they didn't even really want to acknowledge things to themselves. That has changed over the past 3 months, especially since the Greenland threat. Now, in private, EU officials, national officials are starting to get a lot more realistic about their assessments. And those assessments are really, really in contrast to what the NATO Secretary General is saying. And when he's been saying over the past 2 weeks that European countries support this war, not only is it against the public statements of European leaders, even though those statements have been relatively mild, except for Pedro Sanchez of Spain, I can tell you it is really, really against the private briefings that we're getting. Europe is not supportive of this war, although their public statements vary in terms of intensity. So yeah, Mark Rutte seems to be more and more out of touch with the reality of what his other 29 members, 31 members rather, are saying, that is, his European members. It seems increasingly like he only views himself as working for one boss, and that's Donald Trump, even though he's supposed to be working for all of the NATO members.
Really good to talk to you. As always, Dave. Dave Keating, our correspondent in Brussels. And to Dave points on Spain and